City Tool. Thanks, amigo. Morro, Cabaña, Plaza de la Revolución.
This is Jim Doyle in Cuba, where for the first time in 54 years, the United States has reopened its embassy in Havana. But although President Barack Obama reestablished diplomatic ties with this island nation, only an act of Congress will lift the trade embargo, which has kept most U.S. firms and American tourists away from Cuba's shores. Congressional action to end the embargo, or what the Cubans call the blockade, is not a sure thing, especially during a presidential campaign. In some political circles, hard feelings remain over Fidel Castro's rise to power in 1959, his seizure of U.S. properties in Cuba, his attempts to export his revolution to other Latin American countries, and his willingness in 1962 to allow Soviet missiles on Cuban soil. Lifting the embargo, critics say, would only strengthen Cuba's police state. Critics have branded Cuba a basket case due to its decades of communist rule, crumbling infrastructure, and snail-like pace of development. With its decaying buildings and dilapidated streets, this nation is ripe for outside capital investment. Cuba boosters celebrate this tropical island's biodiversity, its vibrant culture, social welfare gains, and the resilient spirit of its people. It's a poor country of 11 million people, and despite the revolution's goal of redistributing wealth, a significant economic gap still exists between the elite, such as government bureaucrats and successful entrepreneurs, and most other workers and the unemployed. But the poor in Cuba have shoes on their feet. Absent are the distended bellies and other clear signs of malnutrition found in some developing countries. Castro established a healthcare system that emphasizes preventative care, resulting in a low infant mortality rate and greater longevity, and a school system that raised the island's literacy rates. There's an emerging middle class with an appetite for designer fashions, cell phones, and the latest kitchen appliances. But large retail stores are scarce. Toilet paper, certain food staples, and consumer goods are in short supply. The Communist Party is Cuba's only legal party, and a half-century later, the party faithful still celebrates the revolution. According to the U.S. State Department and Amnesty International, the Cuban regime routinely stifles political dissent and imprisons dissidents. State-owned television and radio channels dominate public discourse. Independent journalists are harassed and detained for reporting information not sanctioned by the state. Cuban government officials were unavailable for comment. With its legacy of tobacco, coffee, and sugar plantations, Cuba was the last slave-trading country in the Americas. It's now a multi-ethnic, interracial melting pot. But dark-skinned Afro-Cuban minorities say they are victims of employment discrimination and targeted by police for checks and searches. With their stoicism and playful wit, most Cubans seem to take their woes in stride, amusing themselves in myriad ways. There's no shortage of Cuban beer, mojitos, or cigars. One person who especially enjoyed those frozen daiquiris was Ernest Hemingway, the American Nobel Prize-winning author of The Old Man and the Sea and other classics. He maintained a residence in Cuba for more than 20 years and fished for marlin in the nearby Gulf Stream. Mafia gambling casinos were closed in 1959 by Fidel Castro, but this former playground for the mob is still known for its colorful nightlife and carnival celebrations. Music and dance are national obsessions.
¡Saltando! ¡Saltando!
Pope Francis urged the United States to restore ties to Cuba and has reached out to the island's many Roman Catholics, whose faith often embraces a carefree, hedonistic lifestyle and the Afro-Cuban rituals and deities of the Santeria religion. First sighted by Christopher Columbus in 1492, the Caribbean's largest island is blessed with limestone rock formations, lush mountain valleys, and rich volcanic soil. Rain squalls and trade winds temper its occasionally broiling afternoons. Only 90 miles from Florida, Cuba is home to exotic animals and countless butterflies. But this island faces increasing environmental stress as it morphs into a fully modern society. Despite conservation efforts, some of Cuba's endemic wildlife species are jeopardized by deforestation and loss of habitat. Cuba's largest cities now face increased traffic, water pollution, and smog. To many Cubans, the trade embargo reflects a war between governments, not ordinary citizens. Cuba has suffered a brain drain in recent years, losing young people who desired greater opportunities to the United States and elsewhere. Facing ill health, Fidel Castro stepped down as president in 2008 in favor of his younger brother, Raúl Castro. Since then, political and economic reforms have allowed increased opportunities for small business ownership. Cubans are natural-born entrepreneurs who can wring a tidy profit out of a handful of pesos. In recent years, a steady stream of Canadians, Europeans, Latin Americans, Asians, and others have visited Havana and the island's beach resorts. Brazilian investors are building a deep-water port about 30 miles west of Havana. U.S. companies are eager to carve out new Cuban markets. With increasing access to telecommunications, the internet, and social media, Cubans are savvy about the personal cost exacted by their political system. Many Cubans crave greater contact with the United States and enjoy a thriving black market for American films, TV shows, music, and clothes. They are hopeful the thaw in diplomatic relations will lead to better lives for themselves and their loved ones. Yet some Cubans worry they'll soon face new commercial pressures and societal changes.